Hey guys, how you doing today? This is David Lucas back here again. Welcome back to my channel. And now I'm coming back at you guys again today for another Halloween review. Special review, I should say. Another continuation of it. You guys know last week I did a review of When a Stranger Calls. This week I'm going to be giving you guys a review of probably one of my favorite modern horror movies. Probably one of my top 10, top 15 horror movies of all time. Probably. Like, this movie is honestly phenomenal. And that movie is, of course, if you've seen the title card already, you already know, but that movie is The Descent. That is probably one of my all-time favorite horror movies. It's probably one of my favorite modern horror movies of all time. It's top 5 modern horror movies, one of my favorite. I watched it again this year, and then when I just watched it, I was like, I gotta do a video on it because this video is just so damn good. Now, basically, the overall plot of this movie is that this movie stars a girl named Sarah, who in the beginning of this movie gets into a very bad car accident with her daughter and her husband, and ends up being the only survivor of that car accident. And then the movie kind of transports like a year or a couple years later, and we end up seeing the fallout of all that and seeing where she is at now and how she has kind of closed herself off from the world and is in depression mode and all that. And so her friends basically organize a trip to go out basically spelunking in a cave, and her and her friends go out spelunking in a cave, and her one friend Juno though ends up sending them out to the wrong cave that they weren't supposed to go to, and this cave just so happens to be an unmarked cave that has a lot of history, a lot of dark history behind it, and these group of girls end up getting trapped in this cave and have to fight their way out. Now, I know in most of my reviews I usually go into the good and to the bad, but to be completely honest with you guys, I don't think there is anything bad about this movie that I can even think of. This is seriously one of the perfect movies that I can say that is a perfect movie. Right off the bat, what noticed me about this movie is that it's such a unique film. It's such a different kind of film in general, especially with the scares in this movie. That's what makes it so unique, is that the scares are very different. Very much of like a claustrophobic type of scares. For the main villain or the main creatures even to show up in this movie, you're already being scared with a whole bunch of other things. You're being scared of the atmosphere they're in of this. There's certain scenes where somebody gets stuck in a cave, and then literally I was on the edge of my seat panicking because I felt like I was in there with them, and everybody was panicking in this movie too and everything just by being stuck in a cave. And there's other scenes too where you see like how far they're up and how they have to kind of jump and glide to the other side and stuff like that. You even start to think too, it's like how much oxygen can they even get? How far can they go down without any oxygen? And then you start worrying about the cave start falling, because you see there are parts of the cave that's falling in on them and they have to hurry and get out of space. And this is all like scares and panics before the actual horror, would you just say horror with the monsters and stuff that show up, even come up, before you even know that they have anything to do with this movie. It is such a good movie before the actual kind of movie starts, and that's what makes it so unique and so cool, is that this actual scares have nothing to do with the monsters mostly. A lot of the scares have to do with your psychological, with your in your mind, of what really scares you in your head, and that kind of fears, and I love those kind of fears. Movie 2 is a very multi-layered type of movie. It starts out as one movie, and then it progresses into another, and then it ends in a completely different kind of movie, and I love that. It does better than most movies that feel like there's a lot going on, is that it executes it perfectly to where you feel like nothing is being left out. You feel like there's still everything gets enough time, enough breathing space. The very beginning of this movie, it starts out as kind of a drama, almost like a drama of this woman. She's lost her husband and her daughter, and there's also kind of implication that her husband was cheating on her with their friend, and we have all that going on, and we're dealing with this woman going through this psychological trauma of losing her family while going through this cave experience type of thing, and that adds on to the kind of layers of this person, of this main character that we're following, and of the overall story of this movie in general, that is not necessarily about the scaries or the monsters or even the cave in general. Like, that is almost just the side of it of what's really going on in this movie, and I love that. Something too that this movie does so great is that you care for each and every one of these characters in this movie. Even some of the worst characters like Juno, who in this movie, which I'm not going to spoil much, but she is not necessarily the best kind of characters in this movie. You find yourself rooting for her at sometimes and cheering for her because of the character they built up with her. She's a tough character. Same thing with basically everybody else in this movie. They are all have different kinds of personalities to them. They have different kinds of characterizations to them. They all look different. They all have their different kind of styles, and I like that. That's something very unique that you don't get much in horror movies, because you really don't. You really just get cannon fodder characters, but mostly every single character in this movie is not just cannon fodder. They are an actual character. And I love that, because when they eventually die or get it in the movie, you actually feel emotional. You almost feel like, no, 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 don't get her. Oh, no, don't do it. Don't, no. And you get that in this movie. You feel emotionally connected to these characters because of how much buildup you get in this movie before the kills actually start. And the development you get with these characters throughout the movie, it's really done really good, and that's something I appreciate so much that most horror movies don't do. Speaking of the characters, the main character of this movie, Sarah, is honestly a really fascinating and interesting character. Usually with horror movies, your main character can make or break the movie, and this definitely adds on to the movie so much more, the character Sarah. Like I was saying before, she starts out as like a very broken character, a very distraught, broken character. She's on antidepressants. She's very depressed. Like I said, she lost her family and everything like that. Like, she's doing really nothing with her life, and we end up having her friends coming to her, and her friends kind of talk her into going on this adventure, this trip together to kind of get her mind off of it, you know? And even when we're on this trip at first, when she's in the cave, she's very scared. She's very frightening. You can tell how much she's dealing with her trauma in the very beginning of this when they're in a cave. Like, there's a certain scene, like I was saying, where she gets stuck in a cave, and you see that trauma building up, and that kind of feeds onto you as the audience freaking out, and it ends up feeding onto her friends too, which start freaking out, and everyone is freaking out because she's freaking out, but it's her trauma that's making her freak out, but you understand that, and you feel that because you see what happened to her in the beginning of this movie. As the movie progresses and carries on, she ends up growing more as a character. She's experiencing now, basically, she becomes a survivor. She becomes a survivalist. She becomes at first, a frightened, broken, scared person. And then as the movie, she becomes more of a survivor. She becomes more of a warrior even at the ending of this movie. She has blood all over her. She's just on a full kill mode. Her look in her eyes too. And I love how the actress, what she performs it. It's like she really does show how this character changes, how she develops through this movie. And I love that. I love that so much. She ends up finding out more about what happened with her husband and how he was having an affair with one of her friends, Juno, who Juno was the one who put them on this trip in the first place and getting them stuck in there in the first place. And I love that kind of revelation and that kind of ending, how it ends up at the very end with her and Juno. I really love that. I love too on the movie we're having flashbacks of her daughter, I think what it is, and we're seeing how like that is kind of fueling her and pumping her up and kind of getting her out of this depression mode when she needs to be in straight up survivor mode. There's even like a certain scene here which I really love where she falls into basically like a pool of blood. I love the cinematography in this scene. This movie cinematography is so brilliant too, and I love when she falls into this pool of blood and then she kind of comes up, like she's in there for like a little bit and then she comes up, and when she comes up it's almost like this is her rebirth. This is her kind of transformation into a warrior, into a survivor, into getting out of the shell that she was in the beginning of this. And I just love that scene. I just love it so much because she does go kind of crazy in it, and I love it. And near the end of the movie, she does kind of lose her mind, and you see that at the end of the movie that she does, and I love that. Now, this is a horror movie, and I haven't even got into the creatures yet of this movie that are the creatures and monsters of this movie. And they are great. They are pretty good too. When they show up, I love how the little subtitle that you have in this movie, how like in the very beginning, if you look very like in the background, you see something moving in the background. And also too, very quickly, I love how at first you don't see them. Like you only hear them, or you see like a little bit of their shadows, like I was saying, or like a half of their face. You don't see all of it. It takes really till like the last kind of battle scene till you really see these creatures. And those creatures, too, themselves have this kind of interesting mythology going behind them. Like, where do they come from? What are they? Because we get a little bit. And like I always say, less is more. And we get that a lot with these creatures with the less is more. Because we get a little bit onto their history, like a little bit of that they have evolved into these kind of creatures, that they were probably humans at one time that lived under these caves, and they evolved into this. And we end up seeing kind of, because at first they just looked like mostly like male creatures going after them, but halfway through it, we see the main character, Sarah, go after and kill a female creature of theirs. So that makes me very interested. Like, this probably was like a whole community at one point, like of humans that were down there that evolved in these creatures. And it makes it really interesting to like, I wonder what these creatures are like actually like. And they can't see, they can only hear by sound and stuff like that. So the creatures themselves are very interesting and just creepy by their movements and the way they look. And then when we see certain scenes of them just tearing, eating people, like some of the people apart in there, it's honestly horrifying. And like I said, the noises they make are horrifying too, and just the fact that there's so much less and they're playing on the less is more with the creatures just works perfectly. And the fact that you don't even need these creatures until halfway through the movie to make this movie scary already is just a point on how good this movie is. And the ending too. The ending I honestly really loved at the end of this movie. Like, it was one of those very open-ended, like, whoa, what? But it works, I think, and I think it fits because it can fit multiple different scenarios, I think, that work either way you think about it. You can either think that she went crazy, insane at the end, and this is just part of her hallucination, or you can think that maybe there was something more deeper going on with Juno, and Juno was maybe doing something more deeper than we think, or maybe at the end of the day, it was all hallucination, and she's still in the cave and never escaped, and she just went full-on batshit crazy at the ending, and she's just hallucinating her escaping. You know, there's so much open endings to how the way this movie ends that I really loved and I thought fit so perfectly for this movie, because an ending couldn't make or break this movie, and they chose a way to where it's like, it's up to you. And I think that works to make the ending even better at the end of the day, because now it's left up to the viewer's imagination, and you guys know me, I love that when it leaves up to the viewer's imagination. So as a whole, what I gotta say about the movie The Descent is that The Descent is one of the best modern horror movies, and is a very underrated movie to begin with that not much people talk about. It has great, unique scares. It has great character development. It has a great story that is the center of the film, with the scares and the actual horror of the film being the backdrop of the movie that works so perfectly for this movie, and which makes it so different than other horror movies. It has characters that you actually like and feel for and want to survive and don't want to see die, and when they do die, you get an emotional element to those characters, which works so perfectly, again, for the horror element of this movie. And what makes this movie even better is that it's supposed to be a horror movie, but yet you're already being scared by just the practical illusionists of this going on within the cave before the actual monsters of the movie even appear in this movie, which makes this movie even 10 times better than most of any modern horror movie. I really love this movie, and it's definitely going to turn into probably a constant rewatch of every Halloween season for me for horror movies. I don't think I'd even give a grade into The Descent. The Descent, I'm gonna have to give it a straight up 10 out of 10 to. Yeah, this movie gets a straight up 10 out of 10 in my opinion. This is, again, one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I love The Descent so much. It's such a good, unique, fresh horror movie that I love. Let me know down in the comment section below and let me know your thoughts on The Descent. I always love to know your guys' thoughts on these movies, so let me know down below. Of course, if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. You know, I always appreciate your support all the time. And until next time, guys, we'll see you later.